Serious, to anybody who likes exploring abandoned rundown places, what was the scariest thing that has ever happened to you on your adventures? This was when I was a kid. Maybe 12-13 back when me and my 4 cousins were little hellions. They lived out on a ranch and we would ride 4-wheelers to a bunch of abandoned buildings in the country all the time. One time we came across a bridge and decided to stop and enjoy the view. It was a beautiful day, I should mention. Sun was shining. Birds were singing. And the water in the river looked amazing rushing under the bridge. Then we noticed something strange. There is a rim. As I've shared before in this comment. Owner threatening to beat the shit out of us because he thought we were after copper. Dude was actually pretty chill when he realized we were dumb teens and not meth heads. But he did force us to give over our backpacks to make sure we didn't have spray paint or tools. There used to be this abandoned asylum in the woods by the park near the house where I grew up. The main building above ground had been torn down, but the basement was still there and you could enter it through a small window that was just big enough to crawl through. The furniture and some medical stuff was all still down there. I was too afraid to go through the window, but my friend wasn't. He was down there for about 5 minutes before he screamed and jumped out of the window. He said something was chasing him. We could hear it down there scurrying around, but none of us wanted to get close enough to the window to look with the flashlight. A few years later, a woman got attacked near there by a gaze of aggressive raccoons. Finding 150 barrels of toxic waste illegally dumped in the Packard plant in Detroit. I stayed there too long without a respirator. I had a bad headache and felt spacey for the rest of the day. I also lost about 70% of my sense of smell permanently. About 10 years ago, I was exploring an old rundown hotel in my city with some friends at about 3 AM. The property owners were having serious troubles with squatters, so they had put razor wire everywhere. I was wearing thin jeans. I was 18 and stupid. I tripped on some steps and thought some of the razor wire had just caught on my jeans. We keep going and get inside. Soon I realize my leg is wet. And I don't just mean wet. It is soaked from the knee down. It's dark as hell. So my buddy shines his flashlight on my leg and it turns out it's blood. I have to drop my pants in front of everyone to see where it's coming from. Right above my knee is this little cut. Squirting blood. We all start cursing. One of the girls pukes and has to turn away. Fortunately, my buddy, incidentally the one with the flashlight, takes off his belt and sweatshirt and makes a pressure pack for it and gets me to lay down with my leg above my head for a bit. After a while we decide we have to hike out of there and quick before security comes back for their rounds. So we tighten the belt and we hike out of there. I had to take my pants all the way off because I didn't want to rip them over the sweatshirt. So here I am walking out of this hotel and into the subsequent neighborhood to where our car was parked in my boxer briefs holding my leg. Soaked in blood from the knee down. Ended up going okay. So did up at home with help from dude with the flashlight. He was a nifty friend to have around. TLDR, break into a hotel. Trip over razor wire. Don't realize it's bad until we're all the way in. Have to hike out in no pants. Have good friends. 2 times out of the 100 or so adventures have ended in a scary situation. There's an abandoned hospital here that I explored a lot. I even spent the night in there a few times. It was incredibly intimidating from the outside and not many people had the balls to go in back then. One night I went in with a couple friends and we saw a sleeping bag on the ground that appeared to have a person in it. And one of the friends who had joined, complete idiot, thought it would be a good idea to kick the sleeping bag and see if someone was in it. Sure as shit. Someone was in it. He jumped out of the sleeping bag, screaming at us. No words, just screams. And chased us out of there. The second time, I was at an abandoned factory. Huge factory. I had also been there a few times previously. Made it inside. Started taking photos. And then my friend asked if I could hear someone running. We waited and listened for a minute. And the running kept getting louder and closer. So we got out before we found out who it was running. Or why they were running. I have posted this to a couple other AskReddit questions. But anytime this type of question comes up, I always go back to growing up in a small rural New England town, and as a kid would always venture into the woods and find neat old things. My dad noticed that I was really interested in exploring and finding old things near our land, so one day asked if I wanted to go see something that no one else he knew had known about. I jumped at the chance and we drove off into the mountains and parked on the side of the road. We got out and walked into the woods for what felt like 45 minutes, and we came across this really small cemetery. There had to be 10 or so stones and you couldn't really make out anything on them. But a couple of them that read something like 1802, 1803, and 1803, 1805. My dad said he stumbled on it as a kid and it must have been a small family cemetery. It just kind of broke my heart thinking about how many of those stones were probably infant toddler. I came across a very old, very smashed up VW bug in a ravine in the woods. It had been there a long time since it was half buried in the mud. I started poking around the site and found dozens of old school style ladies' stockings. Many tied together and disintegrating. Scattered around. I found old Kodak film developing canisters. I found a bag of cement completely hardened, among other things. Plus a year before I had found a very old ice pick close to the site. I got the chills and became a bit concerned. I had posted about this on Reddit years ago. But the general consensus was that the chassis was missing and it was just someone's garbage dump. But I still wonder about it. So much of the bug was scattered about and buried in mud. It was just so weird. A few months ago I was cruising around Chattanooga with my sister and a friend. We were on the side of town with this factory some people had told us was a pretty cool old place to check out. So we decided, what the FCK, let's kill some time there. Anyone from the area might be familiar with it. It's the old Central Soya factory off of Amnicola. And there are several videos online of people exploring it. Our first mistake was going through the gate. It was the obvious way in. So we merrily traipsed down the road and onto the property. It's the middle of the afternoon. So it's bright and sunny. And the wind is blowing so we can hear loose M. I found a bag of goat heads at an abandoned grain silo a mile from my house. Usually when farmers kill their animals they will put the heads in a bag or something and then take the rest of the body. Get the meat out and throw away the guts. Either way, I wouldn't want to find a bag of goat heads. Reminds me of Dead Sheep Highway. In Kuwait. Sheep farmers there can get a subsidy from the government if any of their animals get hit by a car on the highway. There are no fences. So whenever a sheep dies, for any reason, they'll haul the body up on the highway and pose it to make it look like a vehicular death. The highway is littered for 50 miles with hundreds of dead sheep. Place looked totally abandoned. Run down shit and trash everywhere. Opened this one door and there was some huge guy masturbating to his big ass TV. You can't unsee something like that. When I was younger, my niece, we're the same age, and I were out exploring an abandoned construction site at night. And didn't notice a huge hole in the ground leading to what I imagine was going to be a tank or basement for one of the houses. She managed to jump over it. But I fell in and ended up with a rebar rod going through the front of my right shin. I was stuck down there for a while before she could grab my hand and help pull me out. We staggered home and packed the wound with tampons and peroxide for fear of getting in trouble. Of course our parents found out when I came down with a terrible infection and other injuries showed up. Also permanently FK'd my left shoulder, smashing it on the way down. I walk with a kinda inward limp to this day. But a large circular scar is all that's really left from the accident. We were so lucky we hadn't both fallen in or gotten more seriously injured so far from home. A few years later a kid I went to school with died falling out of a half-built house. And that made it sink in all the way. Mind the caution tape. Kids, it's not worth the risk. I was exploring an abandoned mine in the Mojave. I was pretty far in. Climbing down ladders and exploring old rooms. I saw old newspapers. Break rooms. Clothes and unexploded dynamite in the walls. Something spooked me and I turned around fast to run. I hit my head on the rock. Broke my headlamp and knocked myself out. I came to, I was wet, cold, and it was pitch black. Like no light at all, black. I tried my headlamp. Didn't work. tried my backup. Didn't work. Flashlight was also dead. I was seriously beginning to get really scared. I continued searching my backpack. I found several odd shapes not usually in it. It was Halloween gem lights that my kids had put into my backpack. I tore the first one open and cracked it. Beautiful green light everywhere. I recognized where I was and made my way out. I surveyed myself. I had a gash in my head about 3 inches long. I was covered in blood and mud. I drove to urgent care down in Victorville. I ended up with 13 staples in my head. I never went back into a mine alone after that. I did go into Cave of the Winds here in CO on a candlelight tour years later. I was fine until they had us blow out the candles. That trapped fear in that mine came right back. It was all I could do not to panic and GTFO of there. Don't explore old abandoned mines by yourself. Tell people where you are. Have backups of backups of backups and don't rely on freaking batteries. There used to be a house just behind our property when I was a kid. It was abandoned. The lady who lived there died some 30 years ago and no one ever bothered with the house. It was seriously run down. All the windows were broken by vandals. Storms had blown stuff all over the place. The floors were water damaged and warped. The paint was flaking off everywhere and it smelled strange. The back area had a shed with what I presumed were jars of canned veg. Exploring an abandoned hospital. It was in the middle of the night. Getting in was a huge pain in the ass, so we were a little excited and started running through the building in the dark. I suddenly grew a brain cell and realized we probably shouldn't just be running through a pitch black building and stopped just short of a 7-story drop to the basement. Not one of my prouder moments. My dad and I were exploring an abandoned mine in Arizona. And we weren't really prepared for it. While my dad was walking, he wasn't really paying attention to where he was going. And at the last second, I saw he was about to step into a vertical shaft. I grabbed him, pulled him back, and then we looked to see how far he would have fallen. It was about a 400-foot drop. We were playing airsoft in an old but huge factory with many floors and very high ceilings, like 10 meters high, in some rooms, and more normal heights in others. So we stopped playing a quick game in one of the upper floor. I see my friend 20 meters away. He is trying to move a big M. There was an abandoned, we thought so, house. So we with my friends tried breaking in. It was dark and creepy. There was another door. I'd check if it was from iron or stainless steel. Though, when we were going away, some old man appeared and started shooting at us from his shotgun, or something. It was charged with salt. Hurt salad. Though it's harmless. Just little blood dots, and it shot me and my friend. We were running on the hill, crying. It felt like my leg is burning. After that, I've never came to the abandoned houses anymore. In my hometown there was an abandoned hospital called Clifton Canadian Red Cross. Google it. It's great. We went for an excursion at midnight one night with a flashlight each. We explored for a while and heard a few bumps. But we put that down to animals scurrying around. The thing to note here is this place is off-road. In the countryside. There is absolutely no artificial lights nearby. Without torches on. You cannot see anything. Not even your hand in front of your face. We just finished exploring one of the 2 long corridors. And then entered the chapel. Whilst in there we heard noise that sounded like a rim. I was 18. When a couple buddies of mine thought it would be fun to visit the remains of an insane asylum out in the middle of nowhere in our town. It's literally a bunch of slabs of concrete surrounded by miles of empty desert. We went around 3 AM and shot the shit trying to spook each other. Other than some pranks, nothing really scary or unexplainable happened. I wasn't scared or creeped out one bit. It was when I got home and went to bed when something terrifying happened. I hadn't had a nightmare in years and this one blew every other one out of the water. I somehow entered into a ghost world which felt super realistic and was on some quest to find my lost child, who was a rabbit. It felt so real and I remember waking up sweating and crying. It was absolutely one of the strangest things I've ever dreamt about. Mostly I just remember the ending of my dream. I was escaping the world on a bicycle with my child in tow. I was shrieking bloody murder because as the ghost world faded, all the ghostly entities were reaching out and grabbing me, trying to keep me there. Ugh. I don't like to think about it and thankfully never dreamt it again. This will get buried, but this post made me remember it. The college I went to had an old campus buildings on an old closed down airport and runway. All the old airplane hangars were revamped into storage and other uses. The department I worked for used one of these hangars for storing large parts. Within this hangar building was another building set of rooms that was completely hidden from the outside world. You literally could only see this from inside the old hangar. This building was used in the past for animal experiments. The breakers were labeled monkey room, small animals surgery, etc. One room had old shock collars in a sink. It had an overall a super creepy feel to it. Like someone was watching, even though we knew it was empty since we locked the door when we left. I could never find any other info on the building. Literally no one ever wanted anyone to know what actually happened there. Went to an abandoned motel. It was also known for being a sex motel. It once had mirrors lining the walls in multiple rooms. My group and I went upstairs and the room smelled like gas. And there was red stains on the walls and curtains, possibly blood. We noped out of there. 2 weeks after the place had set on fire. The fire started in the exact second floor room we were in. I'm thinking whatever happened was contributed by the gas smell and prior electrical damage to the motel. So basically it was a ticking time bomb. My friends and I cold died. I'll keep it short and sweet and just give you the TLDR. Walking through an old neighborhood at night. 25-30 feet away from where I was standing, I distinctly saw floating Jesus head in the bushes trees. Thought I was losing my mind. Called 2 friends over to also have a look. They saw the same exact thing. Probably sat there staring for a good 15-20 minutes. And the Jesus head just floated there staring back maybe 3 feet in the air. We went back the following morning and nothing was there. Which was kind of worse because I was hoping to see a plastic bag or something sitting or hanging from the branches. Nope, nothing. I discovered hundreds of livestock, goats and sheep, being illegally stored in really dirty and inhumane conditions in an abandoned building in Eastern Market in Detroit, not far from my apartment. There was a small slaughterhouse nearby, and I assumed they were the culprits. I tried to get them to leave the building, which would have caused a huge scene, but they wouldn't budge. The next day I was walking past the building to see if there was any activity. A homeless man who was living in the building and likely being paid to guard it approached me and said that Psy kills people who go snooping around where they shouldn't. Apostrophe. I never went back inside, but I called P. Exploring an abandoned house at night in a neighborhood outside of city limits where the population was like 15 people. There was construction equipment everywhere in the house that was just left behind, and a buddy of mine stole a painting that was in the garage. We heard a loud bang upstairs and immediately got freaked out, so we bolted. I slipped on a beer bottle during our daring escape and rolled my ankle. I got my karma for being where I shouldn't. The guy that stole the painting ended up committing suicide a few years later, and I drifted apart from the rest of the group. Not as spooky as the other stories, but that was my one and only instance. My friends and I used to do ghost hunting. The last we did was 2 years ago on an abandoned farm with windmills and a rice mill plant. It wasn't really scary. It only made scary when one guy started shouting and running back, and when he does that, everybody goes running and shouting as well. Then this guy who started it all up keeps saying he saw someone above something or walking, but I didn't saw shit, but it always gives me chills when he says it because he proclaims himself to have a third eye. Used to go and explore abandoned building around where I used to live with a couple of my friends. Always went off without a hitch. Saw some cool things, got the thrills we wanted. But once my friend came face to face with a raccoon at the top of the stairs to the 2nd floor. Fell down them. But it was fine, I broke his fall with my body. Another time we went to a place and everything was still there. Like dishes, TV, furniture, some kids' homework from almost 2 decades ago. The thing about this place is that there were dead animals everywhere. A big crow by the door, dozens of birds and mice were piled in corners. Noped out of there but decided to stop in the shed. 3 raccoons all dead, all right inside the door. We left fast as we could. Became deathly sick the next day. Got some viral infection from the place. Last time I ever went out. Me and a buddy were in our skateboarding heyday and bored with what little our podunk town had to offer. We were skating the same old ledge outside the old civic center. It had been locked up for years. Then I remembered there was a stage inside with a 5 or 6 stair rail. All hardwood floors. We decided to sneak in. We got in through a window. And although nothing happened in particular, the vibe is something I'll never forget. There was dust and pigeon excrement everywhere. But the creepiest scene was the back office. It was like everybody just up and left in the middle of the day. Football helmets were still sat next to decals yet applied. Clipboards with team rosters lay unfinished. Pens left open. In the break room, food was desiccated on the table. There wasn't even signs of homeless people or junkies sleeping in there, which was probably the biggest red flag. All I've ever been told is that it was condemned because it was old. This happened to 2 of my closest friends over 10 years ago. And yet it feels like just yesterday as I type this. They were both artists. Music. Drawing. Photography. They could do it all. They had a band together that they ran in one of their tiny downtown apartments. Had a room to develop all of their amazing photographs and also had a sketchpad close by for aha moments. They went to an abandoned power station building to take pictures one afternoon. And while walking on a catwalk, one of them fell 4 stories into a coal hopper. It took emergency crews over 3 hours to free him. And less than 12 hours after their adventure began, he was pronounced brain dead. He was 26. I'll never forget hearing the wails from his mother as they told her he was never coming back. To those who explore abandoned areas, be safe. And never go alone. You never know when one slip of your foot can change your life and the lives of others forever.